Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 311 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is being present. Our quote of the day comes to us from Jim Elliott. Wherever you are, be all there. I have to say a quick thank you to everyone that has supported our new book, The Positivity Tribe. The initial response has been incredible, and I truly appreciate all of your help in supporting our mission of spreading positivity. I'm extremely grateful to bring you today's episode. I've been a huge fan of Shaka Smart ever since he was the head coach back at VCU. Not only is he a fantastic basketball coach, but to me what is even more impressive is how he cares for his players off the court as men. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Shaka, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So the first question I ask everybody is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
Absolutely. That's why I'm here.
Awesome. So the number one objective of our show is to both motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you yourself have either a no-quit story or perhaps a challenging time personally or professionally where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think for anyone in their lives, there's lots of times where they faced adversity. And one of the things we talk about all the time with our team is the fact that sometimes we have thoughts about giving up. Sometimes in our minds, there are parts of our minds that are saying to stop or saying to not keep going. And that's one of the huge parts of sports, right? Is being able to keep fighting and persevere, find more inside of you. There's probably lots of examples I could give you, but there's no really one main one that comes to mind. Probably just everyday life.
Yeah, no, and I think especially during 2020, what we're going through. An interesting question we ask everybody is, if you had to define yourself, but you could only use one word, what word would you pick?
Present. Just trying to be in the moment, trying to be here with you now doing this podcast. If I'm with my daughter, trying to be there with her and not be thinking about the next day's practice or a game in a few days. And I'm far from perfect at being present, but if I strive to be one thing, that's it.
I think it's so important, especially as technology is taking over with phones and things where we're distracted all the time. And I love that word present. And you said is when you're here, you're here. And I do the same thing when I'm interviewing people or I'm being interviewed myself. It's the phone's down, I'm focused. So I appreciate that. I want to ask you, 2020 has been an incredibly challenging year in so many different ways. How have you stayed positive yourself personally, but more importantly, how have you kept your team positive and focused during these incredibly difficult times, especially with heading into the season and not really knowing exactly how things are going to go?
Well, I think it's always a choice that we make every day. We like to remind our guys that each of us was chosen to be here, but at the same time, each of us chooses every day to be here. And I think that's a powerful reminder for anyone, whether you're on a team or whether you're going to work at a certain place or in the military, part of a family organization, whatever it may be, just that there are certain choices we have. And if we can stay aware of the choices that we make and understand that when we wake up in the morning, we continue to have choices. But I think as we emphasize with our guys, one step before that choice is to be able to have the, again, presence and awareness and acceptance of what is, to be able to decide to do what's next. A lot of times, all of us fall victim to the circumstances dictating our choice instead of the circumstances being what they are and us choosing, oh, this is what I'm going to do next. So we talk about that a lot with our guys, but it starts with the individual. So you asked me, how do I stay positive? I just try to make the choice, and I spend a lot of time working on being present and being aware and accepting whatever's going on.
I've heard you on a couple different shows, and one of the questions we ask is, and we believe is the power of books. And I'm curious if you've read anything recently, or perhaps you're currently reading something that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Absolutely. I'm one of those guys that's got a rotation of books that I like to read and reread. So tell me what kind of book you want.
I like that. Spin it back to me. So I'll give you two. Is one somewhat in the personal development space, and then maybe one that's not a book that's well known.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a basketball personal development book, and it's certainly timely for your question about 2020 because of the tragic death of Kobe Bryant. This is a book that I keep on my desk called Kobe Bryant, The Mamba Mentality, and try to use that with players and even with coaches, with myself, to help develop our own mentality. Every person, every player, every coach, everyone in any walk of life should have an approach that they develop, that they document, that they utilize each day to be their best. And Kobe's is well documented and well known. And not only that, he was as good as anyone at actually executing it. It's one thing to have a mindset or a mentality. It's another thing to go live it. So that's a book that it's really easy to read because it's a combination of beautiful pictures and also text. So that's one that I'd recommend to anyone, particularly people in athletics that are trying to kind of develop a holistic mindset towards what they do. Let's see, an unknown book. I've recommended this one a few times before. Is probably one of my top 3 or 4 favorite spiritual books. It's called The Untethered Soul, written by a guy named Michael Singer. And it's just all about learning about how to be the real you, the true you, and not all the crazy stuff that our minds sometimes tell us that we are.
2 fantastic books, and I've read and reread the Kobe book a couple times. And to your point, not only is it an easy read, but it's got some amazing pictures, but it really identifies who Kobe was. And I'm a huge Jordan guy, so I was always saying, Jordan's the best. But as Kobe got older and throughout his career, I realized that, he epitomized hard work and dedication and commitment both on and off the court. So I have to ask a follow-up question, because this has come up probably a few times in the last year or so at the podcast, but the idea of rereading books. So I wanted to ask you, what are those couple of books that you reread? Because I think for me, until somebody said it maybe a year or so ago, I wasn't as into that as I am now. And I realized that for me, there are quite a few that I reread, and it's almost like every time you read them, you get something different.
Absolutely. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have a photographic memory. So sometimes I'll read things and then promptly forget about them. So I have, let's see, probably 12, 15 books on a table in our living room. It's probably not ideally placed for the rest of my family, but it's kind of my favorite place to sit. And every morning, one of the things that I do is I do some type of reading from, 1 or 2 or 3 of those books. I can give you some of them if you want. You probably don't want to hear all of them. Like I said, The Untethered Soul, The Power of Now, A New Earth. I like reading. Got several books by John Kabat-Zinn that are in that rotation. Mostly stuff about self-realization and just getting to know who we really are. So that's the stuff that I reread. And some of those books, most of those books have been around for a while. So I've, read and reread, a few times. There's different color highlights in those books. But like you said, you tend to pick up different things each time you reread them.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating when you have a couple books that you do that with. and you go through them, and I'm guilty myself. I've got books all over my office and my house as well. And to your point, it's you get something out of it. And when you go through them, sometimes something hits you on a certain day very differently than it would on another day. And I know personally during this pandemic in 2020, there have been a bunch of things that I've gone back and reread that have stood out a lot differently because of what we're going through.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's changed a lot of people's perspective, that's for sure.
100%. Jay Billis has spoken about you, talking about you being one of the most positive, impactful coaches. And I think it's evident to see how you do that with your players, both on and off the court. And he also said something about how you're demanding of your players in a good way, but never demeaning. And I think that's so important because a lot of times we see the yelling and screaming from coaches on the floor, but you don't always know what's going on. How did you decide that you're going to be a highly demanding coach, but you're also going to do it in a different way than a lot of coaches do?
Well, I think it's a combination of my background and then just making adjustments with the times. It's 2020, so the way that guys need to be coached and want to be coached, and a mixture of those two things is certainly different than it was in the 80s and 90s when you and I were growing up. For me, I was raised by a single mom. My dad was never really a positive part of my life. So my coaches were really the ones that filled that void, and particularly basketball coaches. But I really looked at all coaches in any sport that I played with a true reverence. I mean, I looked at these guys like they were 10 feet tall, and whatever they said was gospel. So their opinion really, really mattered to me, and still does. I mean, I talked to my college coach last night, actually, and I still hang on every word that he says. So the way that I interact with our guys is with that in the back of my mind, just knowing the way that I felt about coaches. Now, I learned early on at VCU in my early days of being a head coach that not all players look at coaches the way that I did and still do, and that's okay. But you kind of formulate your coaching style based on your own experiences, what you think is going to be helpful for guys, and also what you think is going to be effective. And then the last part of it is, I do think as an African-American coach, coaching mostly African-American players, there's a little bit different, aspect of that relationship that you certainly have to keep in mind, particularly in these crazy times that we're in our country with all the things going on off the court. So that certainly gets factored in as well.
No, I think that's important. And I like how you spoke about not all players look at coaches the same way. And I think that's an important perspective of coaching is every player is different. I think the successful coaches that I look up to, those are the ones that realize and understand how to connect with different players. And I think obviously from your playing days through coaching, there's a type of guys that need the rah-rah. You can smack them on the back. But then there's other guys you need to connect with and understand what drives them. And that's one of the things that always intrigued me during my coaching career, is trying to connect with each player. One of the things that you often talk about, and I've heard you speak about, is servant mentality. And I think that's a word, or that's an idea that gets often maybe misunderstood. Just wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just briefly touching on it, because I think it's so important and it's so evident to see what you do with your players both on and off the court.
Well, I think for all of us, there's a tendency that develops over the course of probably childhood and early adulthood to be a little bit self-absorbed and caught up in yourself and what needs to happen next for me. How do I feel about this? And then part of the maturation process is understanding that A, we're all connected. B, having compassion and empathy for others is so powerful in the effect that you have on them, but it also has a powerful effect on you. And then C, kind of in a related way, and this is the unbelievable thing about athletics, is when you are able to lose yourself in something bigger than yourself, it is such an unbelievable feeling that really can't even be described in words. So, how do you cultivate a servant mentality as a coach or as an athlete, kind of with all those things in mind, knowing that you do have personal goals, the people around you do, and you're being evaluated on certain things that maybe are different than, what you evaluate yourself on. All those things certainly make it a complicated dynamic. But to me, you can always simplify it by, a friend of mine says this all the time: when things are going well, focus on others. And when things are going really, really tough, focus on others. And that's obviously easier said than done, but it's a good reminder that, again, a buddy of mine hits me with on a regular basis.
I think that's fantastic advice, not only during what we're going through today, but in general. So, wanted to ask you a question geared towards your team and staying connected. I know this year, especially the past few months, have been incredibly challenging, where the whole connection perspective of coaching is different. It's virtual. Some players went home for the summer. Some schools were not open. What did you do, or how did you stay connected with your players, knowing that unfortunately we had to be so physically disconnected?
It was a fascinating time. I mean, unlike any other since I've been in coaching. That was by far the longest that I've been away from players, and a team's been away. Teammates have been away from each other. I mean, like everybody else, we used Zoom, we used FaceTime, we used the phone, we used text messages. We tried to communicate about different topics. For me, it was a good opportunity to really focus on these guys beyond basketball, because just the timing of when the pandemic hit and the quarantine started, it was in March. So really, with the season being canceled at that point, we were about as far away from playing our next game as you possibly can be. And again, it was just an opportunity to say, hey, how can we form connections with these guys and help them grow in areas off the court? I started a practice that I've still continued, and hope to continue throughout the season. It'll certainly get more challenging as we get into the heat of the season. But I started sending our guys and some other folks that are friends and acquaintances of mine an excerpt from the reading that I do every morning. This stuff has nothing directly to do with basketball. It does indirectly impact basketball for sure. But again, it's about being present and being in touch with the real us, and being connected with others, and what that means. And just from people that have worked on this stuff and studied this stuff and know a lot more about it than I do. And it's just been good to communicate with our guys about things that it's been interesting. Every single one of them at different times has really found, things that they can sink their teeth in this area, because it's something for all of us that I think we crave to learn more about and, really dive into, but sometimes our minds tell us no.
I appreciate you touching on that and expanding on what you did for your players and some other people in regards to sending out different messages. And I think although we were physically distanced from people and we had to socially distance as well, I know that there were just a bunch of people that were doing really creative things like that to stay connected, and in some ways to get connected in a different way that they hadn't. And to your point about hopefully continuing during the season, I hope that a bunch of people and company and teams that have done or started new things continue it during this upcoming season and in 2021, because I think there's been some valuable relationships that have actually been created or strengthened because of the time where people can actually pick up a phone or send a text and say, hey, Shaka, how you doing? We haven't spoken in a while. And I've just seen some really cool things, and I'm glad you touched on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because technology is so powerful in helping us be connected, but we also have to make sure that we use it as a tool as opposed to, us becoming, completely dependent every second of the day on looking at our phone or being on our computer. I think every person has experienced Zoom fatigue at different times. So again, it all comes back to awareness of where you are in that moment and what you need to do. Do you need to take a break from technology? Do you need to go outside and just be in nature? Do you need to try to connect with someone actually in person if possible? But certainly, during the quarantine, we're fortunate to have the technology that we had because, I don't know how any of us would have stayed connected otherwise.
Yeah, and that's a good point you touch on is that break from technology. And I know personally, there are days where I had back-to-back Zoom calls and podcast interviews, and all of a sudden it's 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and you basically haven't moved. And I think that's one thing that I've seen on the positive side is people saying, okay, you know what, I need to get up and go for a walk. I need to go outside for a little bit. I need to just turn off my phone. And I think so many people have touched on that, and it's really powerful. And I think taking a break from technology is something that I hope we continue to do as things gets back to normal or the new normal. Want to change lanes here. And I'm curious, if you could go back and give the 20-year-old version of yourself just one piece of advice, what would that be?
Oh, wow. I'd give myself a lot of advice. If I could just give myself one piece of advice, it would really to probably more aggressively move down the path that I'm on now of, again, just self-discovery and connection with others on the topics of consciousness and awareness. I think it was always something that was of interest to me. But when you're that age, you're moving so fast and you're so caught up in maybe, what just happened or what's going to happen in the next week that you might not have that same perspective.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating as people get older. I think people tend to turn towards that self-discovery, personal development, personal growth, because you're looking to change and improve things. And to your point, when you're 20 years old, not that you don't care about those things, but things are going, to your point, so fast and everything's going at you, and you got practice, you got school, you got friends, family, and all of a sudden, you graduate from college and you're like, where the heck did the last 4 years go?
Absolutely.
If I could give you the opportunity to have dinner with anybody dead or alive, who would you pick?
Well, this probably isn't the answer you were looking for, but probably my grandfather, just because he's the person that is no longer with us anymore that if I could be around, I would most choose to be around. But if you're looking for a famous person, I would probably say Malcolm X, James Baldwin, someone of that ilk, Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou. I would say just in my reading and watching videos and studying of those men and women, probably the most intelligent that I've ever seen or heard.
Maya Angelou in particular has just some fascinating quotes that, even though she's been gone for a little while, they just resonate. And not only do they resonate, but quite a few of them I've shared on different social media posts and also on the podcast, because some of the stuff that she said was just so powerful and so ahead of her time, I believe.
Yeah, she and Toni Morrison, if you like Maya, you should do some studying of Toni, because even a better writer and just as sharp of a mind. And, we lost two titans, in the last few years when they both passed away.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate that recommendation. So we're going to switch over here now to what we call our hot seat questions. Hopefully have some fun. And the only request we have for you is you spit out the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
If you have the last meal, you can absolutely pick anything to eat. What would you pick?
I'm not really a foodie, but the first thing that comes to mind is some really good pancakes.
Oh, favorite smell?
Ooh. Probably my daughter when she was a baby.
Babies are the absolute best smell. I think I know this one, but favorite sport?
Basketball, of course, but if I had to pick a second, it would be soccer.
Do you have an all-time favorite team?
Either the 80s Lakers late 80s Lakers or the 90s Bulls. That's, toss up between those two.
You can't go wrong. All-time favorite movie?
Wow. Well, when I was in college, we used to watch Scarface or parts of it every night. So that one's kind of ingrained in my mind. So I'll go with that.
Do you have an all-time favorite author?
Yeah, that's really tough. I would say Eckhart Tolle, just because he's the one I probably read the most now. But if you wanted fiction, then Toni Morrison.
What is your favorite app you use on your phone?
Favor.
And what's your background picture on your phone?
My wife and my daughter. There's a picture of them. It's a little dated now. It was taken when I had come to Texas and they were still in Richmond. They hadn't moved here yet. So it was the spring of 2015. And, that was tough being away from your family. So I still have that picture in my background.
That's awesome. And do you have an all-time favorite quote?
Well, I actually have a quote list that I started many, many years ago, and I used to actively add a quote to every day. So it got to I think it's over 120 pages. I don't really add quotes to it anymore. So it's tough to pick one, but I'll give you one that is certainly in the top, 25 favorite quotes. And this is from Steve Prefontaine. I use this with our players all the time. He was a great runner who unfortunately passed away in a car accident. And he said, to give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift.
That's a fantastic quote. And I'm a huge quote guy myself. I have collections all over the place, but I do not have 120 pages of quotes. So kudos to you for that. So what's the best way for our listeners to follow you outside of your coaching? Are you active on social media, and do you post and share stuff anywhere?
I'm not much of a social media guy. I do have social media accounts that we put stuff on about our team, or every once in a while, some other topic. But, for me, I try to focus on, again, just being in the moment with the guys that we have. I think there's a lot of positives from social media, but also it can really create comparison. There's another good quote for you. Comparison's a thief of joy.
Who's that by?
I think Teddy Roosevelt said that.
I like that. See, I asked for one quote and I get two. You're definitely a quote guy. And then last question I have for you, Shaka, is the same question I ask everybody, is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Well, I hope everyone's doing well and practicing self-compassion at a time when it's really, really easy to get wrapped up in negativity in the world or even in our own lives. And I'm just grateful for the contributions that everyone makes to each other. And I appreciate you having me on today. It's always fun to talk about this stuff, and look forward to hopefully all of us moving forward and someday reaching the end of this pandemic.
I appreciate it. I think you shared some really good stuff on today's show, and I know that we'll connect soon. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to episode number 311. Shaka touched on some really important things today. Technology is definitely a tool, but is also something that we should be careful of becoming too dependent on. Shaka shared something that his friend often says to him, and I'm going to end today's episode with it because I think it's extremely powerful. When things are going well, focus on others. And when things are going really, really tough, also focus on others. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.